The rain had always been her confidant. Julianne Cartwright pressed her palms against the cold stone railing of the terrace, watching the city lights blur through the curtain of water descending from the sky. Inside, the gala hummed with the kind of calculated laughter that made her skin prickle, the sharp clink of champagne glasses, the rustle of silk, the subtle warfare of social climbing disguised as philanthropy. She had lasted exactly 47 minutes before the walls began closing in. Her friend Mira had begged her to come. "Just one night, Annie. You need to be seen. Your books are wonderful, but nobody knows the face behind the name." So here she was, wearing a borrowed dress that felt like someone else's skin, pretending to be someone she wasn't. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent years hiding behind a pen name, and now here she was, hiding from the very people who might have appreciated her art. The rain was different. The rain didn't judge. It simply fell, washing away pretense, leaving everything raw and honest. She closed her eyes and let the mist settle on her face, a small rebellion against the manufactured perfection inside. She didn't hear him approach. The rain masked the sound of footsteps, the soft click of the terrace door opening and closing. But she felt him, a shift in the air, a warmth at her back that had nothing to do with temperature. Her eyes flew open, and she turned. And the world stopped. He stood 3 feet away, silhouetted against the warm glow spilling from the ballroom windows. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit that probably cost more than her annual rent. His dark hair was slightly damp from the rain, and his eyes, those impossible midnight blue eyes she had written about 100 times in 100 different ways, were fixed on her with an intensity that stole her breath. She knew those eyes. She had dreamed those eyes. But that was impossible. She had never met Julian Sterling in her life. She had only written about him, about the fictional version of him she'd created in her novels, the brilliant, guarded tech mogul named Alex who haunted her pages and her imagination. She'd drawn from public photos, interviews, the way he carried himself in business journals. She'd invented the rest. The way he tilted his head when he was curious. The small scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood accident. The way his voice dropped an octave when he was moved by something. All of it. She had invented all of it. And yet here he stood, every detail she'd ever imagined made flesh and bone, looking at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his entire life. Julie opened her mouth to speak, to offer some mundane explanation for her presence, to apologize for trespassing on his private terrace. But no words came. She could only stare, drowning in the impossible recognition that passed between them like a current. Then he moved closer. 1 step. 2. Close enough that she could see the rain droplets clinging to his eyelashes, could smell the subtle cedar and bergamot of his cologne. Close enough that the air between them seemed to crackle with something electric and terrifying. His voice, when it came, was low and rough, like gravel wrapped in velvet. It was the voice she had heard in her head 1,000 times while writing, the voice she'd given her fictional hero. But hearing it in reality, directed at her, was something else entirely. Something that made her knees feel weak. "Why are you looking at me like you know how I taste, Julie?" Her heart stopped. Then started again at double speed. How did he know her name? Not her pen name, not Annie. Her real name. The one she used only with family and her closest friends. The name that appeared on her birth certificate and nowhere else. She had never given it to him. They had never spoken before tonight. Her lips parted, but all that escaped was a breathless whisper. How do you know my name?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached up with a slow, deliberate motion and brushed a raindrop from her cheek with the pad of his thumb. The touch was featherlight, barely there, but it sent a shiver through her entire body. His eyes followed the path of his thumb, then returned to hers, and in their depths she saw something that made her chest ache with a longing she couldn't name. "I've been searching for you," he said simply. "I didn't know it was you I was searching for. But I've been looking my whole life." The rain continued to fall around them, a curtain of silver separating them from the glittering world inside. Julie felt tears prick at her eyes, not from sadness, but from the sheer overwhelming impossibility of the moment. She had written this scene. She had written this exact scene in her last novel, the one where Alex finally finds the woman from his dreams standing in the rain. She had agonized over the dialogue, the imagery, the emotional weight of two souls recognizing each other across the vast emptiness of time. She had written it. And now it was happening. "I don't understand," she managed, her voice barely audible above the rain. "We've never met. How can you feel like I know you?" He finished her sentence, and his lips curved into a small, wondering smile. "I've been asking myself that same question for the last 10 years. I've had dreams about a woman laughing in the rain. I've felt her presence in rooms where she wasn't. I've looked for her in every face I've ever seen, and tonight I found her." His hand, still hovering near her face, dropped to gently catch her fingers. The touch was warm and sure, and Julie felt something settle in her chest, a piece of herself she hadn't known was missing clicking into place. "I don't know what this is," Julian continued, his thumb tracing lazy circles on her palm. "I don't know if it's fate or coincidence or some cosmic joke. But I know that when I saw you standing here, alone in the rain, looking like you belonged to a different world entirely, I felt like I was coming home." Julie laughed, a breathless, disbelieving sound that was half sob. "I wrote about you," she confessed, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I know that sounds insane. I know you're going to think I'm crazy. But I wrote about a man who looked exactly like you. Who moved like you. Who had your eyes and your smile and your—" She trailed off, suddenly mortified. What was she saying? She was standing in the rain with a billionaire she'd never met, confessing that she'd secretly been writing about him for years. He probably thought she was a stalker. A deranged fan with an unhealthy obsession. But Julian didn't look horrified. He looked moved. His eyes softened, and something flickered in their depths that might have been wonder. "Tell me," he said quietly. "Tell me everything." And somehow, impossibly, she did. She told him about her books, about the hero who had come to her in dreams fully formed. She told him about the research she'd done, the interviews she'd watched, the way she'd pieced together a version of him from photographs and articles. She told him about the scene she'd written where Alex meets the woman of his dreams in the rain. When she finished, Julian was silent for a long moment. Then he laughed, a low, genuine sound that seemed to surprise even him. "I've read your books," he admitted. "All of them. I found the first one at a bookstore in Paris 3 years ago. I couldn't put it down. I felt like someone had reached into my soul and written down everything I'd never been able to say." He squeezed her hand, and Julie felt the world tilt on its axis. "Two strangers," he murmured, writing each other's stories without ever knowing it. "What are the odds?" Julie shook her head. "I don't believe in odds. I believe in this." She gestured vaguely between them, encompassing everything she couldn't articulate. "Whatever this is." Julian smiled, and it transformed his face, chasing away the shadows she'd seen in his photographs. "Good," he said simply. "Because I don't want to let it go." The rain continued to fall, and Julie stood there in the borrowed dress and the impossible moment, holding hands with a stranger who felt more familiar than anyone she'd ever known. Somewhere inside, the gala continued on, oblivious to the miracle happening on the terrace. But Julie didn't care about any of that. She only cared about the warmth of Julian's hand in hers, the way he looked at her like she was the only woman in the world, and the overwhelming certainty that her life would never be the same. The weeks that followed the gala were like living inside one of her own novels. Julie had expected the initial whirlwind to fade, for reality to intrude with its mundane demands and practical considerations. She was a landscape architect who spent her days knee-deep in soil and her nights hunched over a laptop, weaving fantasies for strangers. He was Julian Sterling, whose name appeared on Forbes lists and whose face graced magazine covers. They were from different worlds, and she'd been certain that once the novelty wore off, he would see her for what she was, ordinary, unremarkable, entirely unworthy of a man who could have anyone he wanted. But Julian refused to let her go. He called her every morning, not with the perfunctory check-in of a man trying to be polite, but with the eager anticipation of someone who genuinely wanted to hear her voice. He sent her texts throughout the day, photographs of interesting cloud formations, links to articles about her favorite artists, snippets of poetry he discovered and thought she might like. He showed up at her tiny apartment with takeout from restaurants she'd mentioned in passing, never empty-handed, always with that boyish smile that made her heart stutter. And when she was with him, he looked at her like she was the most fascinating person he'd ever met. Not the way men in bars looked at women, with hunger and calculation. But the way a scholar looks at an ancient text, with wonder and the desperate need to understand. Tonight, she was standing in his penthouse, trying very hard not to cry. The news had come an hour ago, her father's health had taken a sudden turn. The doctors were optimistic, they said, but optimistic was a word they used when they didn't want to say the other things. Julie had known this day would come eventually, had been preparing for it in her quiet way, but knowing and experiencing were two very different things. She had been trying to be brave. She had been pretending she was fine, smiling through the phone call, making jokes about her father's stubborn refusal to take his medicine. But Julian had seen through her immediately. He always did. Now she was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city lights twinkle below, and she felt the tears building behind her eyes. She blinked rapidly, determined not to let them fall. She was stronger than this. She had to be. Julie. His voice was soft behind her, and she felt the warmth of his presence before she felt his hands on her shoulders. She stiffened, shaking her head. "I'm fine," she said, her voice cracking on the last word. "I just need a minute. I'll be fine." "You don't have to be fine." His hands slid from her shoulders to her waist, and he turned her gently to face him. His eyes searched hers, and what he saw there made his expression soften with concern. "You don't have to pretend with me. Not ever." Julie opened her mouth to protest, to offer some clever deflection, but what came out instead was a choked sob. The tears she'd been holding back spilled over, hot and embarrassing, and she tried to pull away. She didn't want him to see her like this, messy and broken and falling apart. But Julian held on. He pulled her into his arms, wrapping her in an embrace so warm and encompassing that she felt her resistance crumble. His chin came to rest on the top of her head, and his arms tightened around her like he was trying to shield her from the world. "Let it out," he murmured against her hair. "I've got you. I've got you, Julie." And she did. She cried into his chest, ugly and ungraceful, her hands fisting in the soft fabric of his shirt. She cried for her father, for the years she'd spent chasing dreams instead of visiting him more often. She cried for the fear that gnawed at her, the fear of loss, the fear of being alone. She cried until there were no tears left, until she was just a trembling, exhausted mess in the arms of the man she loved. He didn't let go. He just held her, rocking her gently, his hands stroking her hair in a soothing rhythm. She felt his lips press against her forehead, featherlight and reverent, and she heard him whisper words of comfort that she couldn't quite make out but felt in her bones. Minutes passed. Hours, maybe. Time had lost all meaning. Eventually, Julie's sobs quieted to hiccups, and her breathing steadied. She pulled back just enough to look at him, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen, her face blotchy from crying. She must have looked terrible, but the way Julian was looking at her, like she was something precious, something irreplaceable, made her heart ache in a different way. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Don't apologize." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the remaining tears from her cheeks. "Never apologize for feeling something. That's what makes you real. That's what makes you you." Julie closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. She could feel the warmth of his palms against her skin, the calluses on his fingertips from years of playing piano. She could smell his familiar scent, cedar and bergamot, and something uniquely him, and it grounded her, anchored her to the present moment. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "I don't know what I'd do if I lost him. He's all I have left. You have me." The words were simple, spoken without hesitation, and they hit Julie like a physical blow. She opened her eyes and looked at him, really looked, and what she saw made her breath catch. He meant it. Every word. "I know we haven't known each other long," Julian continued, his voice low and earnest. "And I know I have no right to promise you anything. But Julie, I need you to understand something. Whatever you're going through, you don't have to face it alone. You have me. For as long as you want me. For as long as you'll have me." The tears threatened to return, but these were different tears, not of grief, but of overwhelming gratitude. Julie reached up and covered his hands with hers, pressing his palms more firmly against her cheeks. "How did you find me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "How did you find me in this whole chaotic world?" Julian smiled, soft and wondering. "I don't know. But I'm not asking questions anymore. I'm just grateful." He pulled her back into his arms, and she went willingly, pressing her ear against his chest and listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. His arms wrapped around her again, holding her close, and Julie felt something shift inside her. A wall she'd built around her heart, a wall she hadn't even realized was there, began to crumble. In the safe cocoon of his embrace, surrounded by his warmth and his quiet strength, she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. She felt safe. She felt seen. She felt home. "I love you," she murmured against his chest, the words slipping out before she could stop them. She stiffened, suddenly terrified that she'd spoken too soon, that she'd scared him away. But Julian just tightened his arms around her and pressed another kiss to her forehead. "I know," he said softly, and there was wonder in his voice. "I know, because I feel it too. I've felt it since the moment I saw you standing in the rain." He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes, and she saw that his own were bright with emotion. "I love you, Julie. I don't know how or why, but I do. I love you with everything I have." The intimacy of the moment took her breath away. They stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, two people who had found something impossible and miraculous. No grand gesture, no passionate declarations to the world. Just two hearts beating in sync, finally understanding each other. Julie smiled through her tears. "We're both crazy," she said. "You know that, right?" Julian laughed, the sound vibrating through his chest against hers. "Completely. Utterly. Absolutely insane." He stroked her hair back from her face. "But I wouldn't have it any other way." They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other in the quiet of the penthouse, the city lights twinkling below them like stars. And in that moment, Julie knew, with a certainty that went beyond logic or reason, that she had found her forever. The man who would hold her through the storms, who would catch her when she fell, who would love her not despite her brokenness but because of it. And that, she realized, was the greatest miracle of all. The library was her favorite room in the estate. Julie ran her fingers along the spines of the leather-bound books, breathing in the familiar scent of aged paper and wood polish. Julian had built this library just for her, after she'd mentioned in passing that she'd always dreamed of having a room like this. A room with floor-to-ceiling shelves, a cozy fireplace, and window seats where she could curl up with a book and disappear for hours. He'd made it happen. Of course he had. He always made her dreams come true. But standing here now, in this beautiful room that was a testament to his love, Julie felt her heart heavy with the weight of her secret. She'd been carrying it for months now, this gnawing guilt that ate at her every time Julian looked at her with such adoration. She had to tell him. She had to explain everything, even if it meant losing him forever. The door opened behind her, and she heard his footsteps, steady, familiar, the sound that had become synonymous with safety in her heart. There you are, Julian said, his voice warm with affection. I was looking for you everywhere. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, pressing a kiss to the curve of her neck. Julie leaned back into him, savoring the warmth of his body against hers, knowing it might be the last time she felt this. Jules, I need to tell you something, she said quietly. He must have heard something in her voice, because his arms loosened and he turned her to face him. What is it? Julie took a deep breath and stepped back, needing distance to say what she had to say. She walked over to the window and stared out at the manicured gardens below, unable to meet his eyes. Remember when we met on the terrace? At the gala, she began. And I said I wrote about you. Julian nodded. I remember. Well, I didn't tell you everything. She paused, gathering her courage. I write romance novels, Jules. Under the name Annie Lane. And the hero in my books. I based him on you. Not in a creepy way, I swear. I didn't even know you. I saw your interviews, read articles about you, and something about you inspired me. I didn't mean for it to become what it did, but I started writing this character, and he became real to me. He had your mannerisms, your sense of humor, your way of tilting your head when you're curious. Even the scar above your eyebrow. I invented a childhood story for how he got it, and years later I found out that was actually what happened to you. She turned to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. I feel like a fraud. Like I've been stealing pieces of you without your permission. I've been writing about you for years, Julian, and I never told you. When we met, I didn't tell you. I let you fall in love with me without knowing the full truth. And I'm so sorry. If you want me to leave, I understand. The silence that followed was agonizing. Julie held her breath, waiting for the anger, the betrayal, the accusations she knew she deserved. But when Julian finally spoke, his voice was gentle. Is that all? Julie blinked. What? He walked toward her slowly, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. Is that all you're worried about? That you wrote about me in your books? I don't understand. You're not angry. I'm the opposite of angry. He reached her and took her hands in his thumbs stroking her knuckles. Julie, I've known about your books for years. Her jaw dropped. What? I found your first novel in a bookstore in Paris, he said. 3 years ago. I was drawn to it for some reason I couldn't explain. The cover was beautiful, and the title felt like a sign. So I bought it, started reading it on the plane home, and I couldn't put it down. Julie stared at him, her mind reeling. You read my book? Before we met? I read all of them. He laughed softly, shaking his head. I finished the first one and immediately ordered the rest. I was obsessed, Julie. The hero in your books. I felt like I was reading about myself. My mannerisms, my thoughts, even my fears. It was eerie. It was like someone had reached into my soul and written everything down. You never told me, she whispered. Neither did you. His smile was sad but kind. I didn't tell you because I thought you would think I was crazy. I didn't know it was you at first. I just knew that whoever wrote those books understood me in a way no one else ever had. I spent years trying to find the author, to meet her, but your pen name was a dead end. I couldn't find anything about you that wasn't carefully curated by your publisher. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. And then I saw you at the gala, standing in the rain, and I knew. I didn't know how I knew, but I knew you were the one. The woman from my dreams. The woman who'd written my soul onto paper. Julie shook her head, disbelief warring with relief. This is insane. It's completely, utterly insane. Yes, Julian agreed, his eyes shining with unshed tears. It's the most insane thing that's ever happened to me. But it's also the most beautiful. You dreamed of me, Julie. And I dreamed of you. We've been telling each other's stories for years without ever knowing it. How can that be anything but fate? He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. Don't you see? We were always going to find each other. It was inevitable. Julie closed her eyes, letting herself feel the truth of his words. All the guilt, all the fear, all the worry she'd been carrying, it melted away in the warmth of his touch. He wasn't angry. He wasn't betrayed. He was grateful. He was overwhelmed with the same wonder she felt. I love you, she said, opening her eyes to meet his gaze. I know I say it all the time, but I need you to hear it. I love you more than I ever thought I could love anyone. I know, Julian said, and there was wonder in his voice. I know, because I feel it too. Every day, every moment, I feel it. He pulled her into his arms, and Julie buried her face in his chest, breathing him in. She felt his lips press against the top of her head, and she smiled. 10 years, she murmured. 10 years of searching for each other across the world, and we didn't even know it. 11, Julian corrected. I found your book 11 years ago, not 10. I've been searching for you longer than I realized. Julie laughed, a sound of pure joy. We're both crazy. Completely insane, he agreed. But I wouldn't have it any other way. They stood there in the library, wrapped in each other's arms, the weight of their shared history finally lifted. Julie thought about all the years she'd spent writing about a man she'd never met, pouring her heart into stories about a love she didn't know was real. She thought about Julian, searching for a woman he didn't know existed, reading her words and feeling a connection he couldn't explain. And now here they were. Two strangers who had known each other's souls long before they'd ever met. Two people who had been writing each other's stories across time and space, weaving a tapestry of love that had finally become reality. I'm not falling in love with you, Jules, Julian said suddenly, pulling back just enough to meet her eyes. His voice was thick with emotion. I'm landing. I've been falling my whole life, searching for something I couldn't name. And I've finally landed. Right here. With you. Julie's heart swelled with love so profound it felt like it would burst. Forever, she asked, needing to hear it. Forever, he promised. He sealed the promise with a kiss, soft and tender and full of everything they'd been through, everything they'd overcome, everything they'd found in each other. When they finally pulled apart, Julie was crying again, but these tears were different. They were tears of joy. Tears of gratitude. Tears of a woman who had finally found her home. I love you, she said again, because she couldn't say it enough. I love you too, Julian replied. Now and forever. They spent the rest of the evening in the library, curled up on one of the window seats, reading each other's favorite passages from her books. Julian pointed out all the places where he'd recognized himself, all the moments where he'd felt like the author was speaking directly to him. Julie laughed and cried and held him close, marveling at the impossible miracle of their love. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she made a mental note to write their story. Not as Annie Lane, the romance novelist, but as Julie Cartwright, a woman who had found her soulmate in the most unexpected way. It would be her most personal book yet, a testament to the power of believing in something you couldn't see. But that was a project for tomorrow. Tonight, she just wanted to savor this moment. To hold the man she loved, to feel the warmth of his body against hers, to know with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The rain began to fall outside, a soft pattering against the windows. Julie looked up at the sky and smiled, thinking about that night on the terrace when everything had begun. She'd been alone in the rain then, hiding from the world and its expectations. Now she was here, safe in the arms of a man who saw her, truly saw her, and loved her anyway. Two strangers. Two writers. Two souls who had been searching for each other across time and space. And now, finally, they had found each other.